This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Jason Redman. He is a retired Navy SEAL, entrepreneur, author, and motivational speaker. He served on SEAL Teams 4 and SEAL Teams 10, and he is the author of a couple of different books. He's got his first book here, The Trident, The Forging and Reforging of a Navy SEAL Leader, and his latest book, which is this one, Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. So his daughter is a big fan of the show. His daughter and his son-in-law are big fans of the show, and so they reached out, and I was very well aware of Jason Redman, but they pitched him to come on the show. I was like, absolutely, let's do this. So if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because back on September the 13th of 2007, he was caught in an ambush where he was actually hit with 8 rounds from an automatic weapon, and one of the rounds actually entered the right side of his face, entering his jaw and exiting through his nose, so ripped off part of his face. He did manage to survive the attack, and so you may have heard about all of those different things, and we talk about that a little bit in this interview today. We jumped around to a bunch of different subjects, which was awesome, but he goes into a lot of detail in the Trident about exactly what happened during the ambush. But during recovery is when he went viral, because he became fed up with this feeling that everyone around him was like talking about him like he wasn't there, and they were just feeling sorry for him. And so he posted a sign on the door of his room, and the sign said this: "Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sorrow or to feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love. I am incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute utmost physically, my body has the ability to recover. Then I will push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense, rapid regrowth. If you are not prepared for that, go elsewhere." Signed, the management. Okay, so most of you probably saw that. It went mega viral back in that time. Someone actually took a picture of the sign. That went viral. He was brought to the Oval Office, to the White House, to meet with President George W. Bush at the time. The sign actually still stands at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And the thing is this guy is just a very, very resilient dude. And there's actually a quote from Overcome that I want to read that'll kind of give you an idea. I know it's a little bit of a longer intro than I normally do, but it's just, I'm trying to really set you up for what you're about to hear. So here's a quote from Overcome. "I have undergone 40 reconstructive surgeries. I have had 6 blood transfusions, and I wore a tracheotomy for 7 months and 2 days. I've had approximately 1,500 stitches, 200 staples, 5 plates, a titanium orbital floor, 15 screws, 8 pins, 20 skin grafts, and 4 bone grafts, including a calvarial bone graft. I have had my jaw shattered, broken, and rebroken 3 times. My mouth was wired shut for over 12 weeks. I've lost over 50 pounds. I've spent ultimately 190 hours in surgery under anesthesia. Despite all that, I am still standing. I'm still breathing. And most of all, I am still in control of my destiny." Guys, I really, really enjoyed my time with Jason. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jason Redman, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I would do more of a casual introduction, but you and I became fast friends offline, and I'm like super excited to get into this. I don't want to like kind of chill as I get into most things. I just want to like fire away, send it. Is that cool with you?
Kyle, let's go, baby.
Okay.
Send it. Honored to be on. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I'm honored that people in your family like our show and like the way that we do things, and they thought you'd be a good fit for this. So this is a family affair today on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast, but we do need to start somewhat simply because I did not serve in the military, but I did grow up in Lawton, Fort Sill, and so I've been around the military my entire life, and so I kind of live a little bit of a militaristic Spartan life myself, having not ever raised my right hand and, promised that I would, defend this country from enemies, foreign and domestic. But for you, what led you or drew you to the military, but then specifically the Navy and the Navy SEALs?
Yeah, and before we get too far away, I will give a shout out to my middle daughter, Sierra, who is absolutely amazing, and her husband, Ian, both of them amazingly strong Christians. Ian, a tremendous protector. I'm honored to have him as a son-in-law, and I wouldn't be on the show if it wasn't for them bringing it up to me and saying, "Hey, Dad, there's this great podcast. We think you'd be a good guest." So
absolutely, great.
Much
shout
love
out to them.
Sierra and Ian. Even though you're a Michigan fan, I still love you. So... So yeah, hey, the military, I was, as you can tell by my jibe at Michigan, I'm originally from Ohio. My family's from Ohio, so I am a diehard Buckeye fan.
There you go.
And, I was born into a family of service. My dad had served in the Army, and I grew up with, and it even went back further than that. I mean, my both grandfathers on my parents' side fought in World War II. On my grandmother's side, very decorated. They were pilots. My maternal grandfather flew B-24s across the European theater. I remember reading an article that hung on the walls in our house where they were shot down, and he crash landed the plane in Yugoslavia, saved his whole career, crash landed in a snowfield, and then led his crew back to Italian lines and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for that. And then flew all his missions, multiple air medals on my paternal grandfather's side. My maternal grandfather's side, they were French, and they fought with the French in World War II, and then immigrated over to Canada after the war. And then my mom was born in Canada before she came here to America. So I just grew up with these tales of service, and it was something from a very young age. I said, hey, I want to be a protector, as I call our class of fire, military, law enforcement, anybody willing to step up and serve others and risk their lives in the service of others. So I call that the protector community. And I started out wanting to be a firefighter, and then I wanted to be a pilot. And then, I grew up in the G.I. Joe generation. So, I became infatuated with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and special operations, and started learning about that. When I was about 14, my dad, who had been a airborne instructor, and he was a rigger, he said to me, hey, you talk about your interest in special operations. There were a group of guys that went through airborne with us. They were called Navy SEALs. And he said, they're considered to be the best of the best, hardest trained in the military. He's like, you should look into them. And I did. And there wasn't a whole lot of information back then, but what I could find just piqued my interest. And interestingly, I'm not like the traditional candidate that you would think. I wasn't like this gigantic jock. I wasn't, I hunted a little bit, but I wasn't like this diehard hunter or anything. I was just a young kid infatuated with the warrior class, if you will, in a lifetime, in a life of service. And the more I explored about the SEAL teams, the more it inspired me to do it, despite everything I heard, hardest training in the U.S. military, all this stuff. So I just decided, okay, well, I'm going to start training, and I need to do hard things, and I need to prepare myself to do this.
Do hard things. That's something that's going to be a through point of our entire discussion today. And now here's the thing with Navy SEALs. I don't know if this is going to be breaking news to some people, but a lot of Navy SEALs have written books, including you. Okay. And so I think at this point we've seen the books.
It is the ongoing joke now.
That's right. Yeah.
All you guys you're a SEAL. You have a book.
Yeah, exactly. Of course you're a best-selling author. But at this point, I think we all know that at some point, Jason, that you were cold, wet, and sandy, that you had to roll around on the beach, that you were very, very uncomfortable. I'm more interested with what are some of the misconceptions about SEAL training, but also just being a SEAL in general, because we don't have to spend forever on this, but I know there's a ton of misconceptions out there, and it's got to drive you guys nuts. So what are some of those?
Well, and Kyle, I'd like to say something about my book. It's one of the favorite things I hear. When people read my book, I hear this all the time. They go, that's not what I expected. And frequently people will say to me, oh, every SEAL book is written the same. You write about buds, you talk about how awesome you were, how you were Achilles, and then, how you did some missions and you slayed people and the greatest warrior on the planet, and that's your book. So did you follow the same format? And I said, no, I write about how I totally screwed up. I almost failed. I almost blew my brains out in Afghanistan, how I had to course correct as an officer and had to rebuild myself and earn back the reputation and trust of my teammates. I don't write about buds at all. I write about Ranger School, where I finally grew up and understood what it was to become a leader, and then implementing those new leadership lessons as a young officer before I was severely wounded, being shot 8 times on the battlefield in Iraq. So that's my book. Much different. A lot of people that read it are like, man, hey, thank you for being so humble and transparent in your journey. I pull no punches on the mistakes that I made. And frequently I hear other SEALs out there, they're like, oh, Jason Redman, that's that guy that screwed up. And I'm like, yep. And I own every second of it. There's nothing I pull back on. So if you want to read a great book about overcoming adversity and about leadership, then read my book. If you want to read another book that's about how awesome a guy is, how he's Achilles, and how great Buds is, then I don't know, go read somebody else's book.
Well, Jason, if I can hop in on that, because I think that pretty much sums up, you answered a better question than the one I even asked. So this is going to be a great interview today because we're both going to make each other better. But the refreshing thing about the Trident is, okay, back in the 80s, everybody wanted to see the superhero on the big screen, the guy that couldn't be killed, the guy that never bled, the guy that never sweated, and that kind of thing. That's kind of what we were drawn to. Whereas now we're probably more into that authenticity. We'd rather people be authentic. And I do an episode at the beginning of every year in January called How to Avoid Being a Crappy Man. And so with that, I have, 15, 16, 17 different things. And it's everything from don't let sports ruin your night to don't be late. But one of the things I put in there as well is don't pretend like you know something that you don't. Now, the lesson for that is if I don't know how to work on a car, but I'm pretending like I know how to work on a car, I'm stealing an opportunity from someone else to teach me what they know. And that could be the same with jujitsu or with shooting or with any type of other modality. The same thing is true as if you pretend like you're spotless, like you've never made a mistake, that you've never potentially blown up your entire life. It's like, dude, you're missing an opportunity to minister to somebody, to mentor to somebody else. And that's not nearly as valuable. Believe me, I like reading the military memoirs of, from Civil War, World War II and Vietnam and the modern war on terror and all those different things. I love the superhero stories, but there's something different about the authenticity of, I was pretty jacked up and I had to make a choice to fix it. You know what I mean?
1,000%. And that's something that's hard. And I think that's a little bit of a problem with, specifically speaking of men. A lot of men have no idea how to be men today. And part of that is some of the ways we've been taught. If you go all the way back, I was raised on this idea, you never criticize, you never complain, you never condemn, you hold everything in. And as I get older, I'm beginning to realize, that's not necessarily true. There's a level of transparency, and you're still human. We still have issues. We still have problems. There is a balance there. You can't become a victim. You must be a victor. I think one of the great gifts that I have is the ability, despite my doubts and fears and challenges, I continue to drive forward and take action. And that was one of the biggest things I try to talk to people about. But it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't exist. There was only one perfect man that's ever walked this planet, and it ain't any of us. So how do we convince people to, A, not allow their doubts and fears and areas of their life that may not be as great as they'd like them to be, which is all of us. And we live in this comparison society. It's so easy to look at other people and say, well, I'm not that guy, and I'm not that guy, and I'll never be this guy. So maybe I should just stop. Well, that's bullshit. You have a lot of great strengths. You have a lot of great talents. Some of you may never be a Navy SEAL, but you're far better than me in other areas of your life. There's no doubt about it. And it's those things that make us great. And I think that's where we have to lean into as men and as leaders, and understanding that. And that can be hard in today's society where everything is constantly dictated by this. How many likes do you have? How many people see you? What's your level of impact? And the reality is, if your impact is with your family and the circle of people around you, then that's probably the greatest impact you could have. But that's hard because of the world we live in today that's trying to push, we measure ourselves by this stupid thing.
Hey, and I fall into the same gap. There are times where it's like, okay, I don't really care if I've made my son laugh today, but I'm like, hey, but I got a good response to the latest video I put on Instagram. And so it's a little bit of a seared consciousness where we're moving our priorities around. Now, one of the big parts of your story really ties back to, I guess you could call it the darkest day in your life or something like that, or at least what started a dark period in your life. And that was back in September the 13th of 2017. And so that's a big part of your story. As you've already mentioned that you were shot 8 times, by machine gun fire. You were on a mission looking for a high value Al-Qaeda target. And I'd like to get a sense
Kyle,
from you because
we'll talk about the mission. I got to interrupt here though, man, because that's not the darkest day of my life. That's what's interesting is so many people think the day that I was shot up and almost died on the battlefield was the darkest. I would say that may dare be one of the best days of my life for a lot of reasons. The darkest day of my life was September 26, 2005, which was 3 days after I made a bad call on a mission in Afghanistan, after a series of bad calls. I had just doubled down on a lot of bad, selfish decision-making. As a young leader, I allowed my ego to get in the way. I allowed my pride to get in the way. I allowed distorted ideas of leadership to get in the way, and made a bad call that was the straw that broke the camel's back with my credibility as a leader, and found myself standing in front of the leadership of my team with people saying, we should kick this guy out. I hit rock bottom and put a gun in my mouth and almost took my life on that day, on September 26, 2005. I didn't. I think the big man above smacked me in the head and said, what are you doing? What message do you send to your wife and kids? And it started a whole new journey. I often tell people that God works in mysterious ways. There's no doubt in my mind God was preparing me to be wounded severely. Because if I had not gone through this whole process of failure as a leader and having to rebuild myself and rebuild the way I led and rebuild the way I specifically the way I led myself and my viewpoint of the world, having to lean into extreme discomfort, having to lead into people who really didn't want me there in the beginning because they didn't trust me. I had to rebuild this trust. I had to rebuild my credibility. All these things over these years these couple of years that I had to do that led up to being severely injured on the battlefield on September 13th. So what's interesting is, yes, I was all shot up in a gunfight. I was hit 8 times between my body armor and body, including taking a round to the face. Massive damage. And I won't lie, in the very first several days, I was struggling a lot. And then I remember at one point just kind of taking a breath and going, listen, you cannot go back and change the past. What has happened has happened. You did things based on the tactics we've been taught. You didn't do anything crazy. You didn't like run off the reservation and do something. You were the most severely wounded. We didn't lose anybody. And I said, and this is no different from the leadership failure that you had and all the lessons you've put in. Like, you're going to lead yourself, you're going to lead others, you're going to lead always, and we're going to overcome. We're going to drive forward. We're going to get off this X. All these things that I had taught myself. And it was in that hospital bed, I said the same thing. I said, the formula is the same. That path where you climbed out of that deep, dark leadership failure hole that started in 2005 continues in this hospital bed in 2007. The formula is the same. So the great news I try and tell people is when your world gets rocked and you get crushed and you go through a life ambush that just breaks you mentally, physically, and emotionally, well, I want to tell you something. God is sending you a gift. And it is a gift that you can grow and get better. The overcome mindset never gets built in good times. It's one of the reasons I called the Trident the Forging and the Reforging, because you have to be forged in massive adversity to truly be better. And if you really want to overcome massive hardship in your life, be thankful when it comes, because it's during those times you're forged. I never would have been able to launch out of my injuries if I had not gone through that journey before. So you talk about the darkest day. The darkest day was putting a gun in my mouth and almost blowing my brains out over a leadership failure. September 13th changed everything for me. It made me, 1, I had a miracle moment on the battlefield that night. 2, it made me realize how precious this life is, and how in those final moments where I thought I was dying on the battlefield, I didn't think about all the BS that all of us focus on. I didn't think about any stuff. I didn't think about, the things that I thought were cool. I didn't think about my truck or motorcycle or money in my bank account or any of that. All I cared about was my wife and kids. And I just wanted like one more second to tell them I loved them. And then I realized driving forward, don't get me wrong. I want to be successful. I want to accomplish things in my life. But at the end of the day, if all this stuff is gone, none of it matters. All that matters is I want to make sure I'm here for my family and kids. And that's the biggest impact I want to have. And that night taught me that. And it also, showed a miracle when I reached out to God and went from not being able to move a muscle to being able to get up and walk 75 yards and get on that helicopter.
So, Jason, I love this because we're going to be jumping around to a bunch of different subject matters, which is a good, commercial for the Trident and Overcome because, guys, we're not going to be just going through a normal narrative from beginning to end here. So there's a question that came up when you were talking about that because I appreciate you talking about because, yeah, I just assumed, I think I said 2017, but it was obviously 2007 on September the 13th. That was a terrible day. You get shot 8 times. You think that you're going to die. But I'm curious as you were describing that, what would you say was more difficult or discouraging or maybe even like soul challenging, trying to rebuild your leadership credibility or trying to rebuild your body after being shot up so bad?
Rebuilding myself after the leadership failure, by far.
Hey guys, real quick. If you're anything like me, you are constantly on the lookout for high quality products that are actually made here in America by American hands. The problem is that a lot of American companies have outsourced their labor overseas, so it's an American company, but it's supporting people that don't live here. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that prioritizes America, American workers, and making all of their materials here in this country. That's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and they are focused on getting as much manufacturing back to the United States as they can possibly do. What do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet, and these are the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they're stretchy and awesome. They also make amazing hunting gear, and I know you guys love your Kuiu and your Sitka, but those companies use overseas labor, and they don't do that to help you guys out. They do that to increase their profit margins. Origin also makes boots and work boots, and yes, that does include steel-toe boots. And in the fall of last year, they launched a line of everyday clothing. Their Versa pants are their everyday pants, and they are just especially phenomenal. They also make other outdoor clothes and workout clothes, and they're launching new apparel stuff all the time. If you haven't already, you need to check them out and support a company that supports America and America's workers. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. With that in mind, that would probably shock a lot of people, Jason. That, hey, like you were shot, you had to have all these different surgeries. You've listed out, in your different books, the different surgeries. It's very easy to find that. But at no point do we see the same depths of despair that you were in whenever you had your leadership failure. Obviously, with a pistol in your mouth, and you're not the only guy from that world, from the special operations world that I've heard that had a similar experience. And we don't need to talk about those guys now, but that would be a big shock to a lot of people, Jason.
Interesting. Humans are tribal, man. And the military is very tribal. The SEAL team's probably one of the most tribal organizations I know. We are, and that's a good and a bad thing. It is a good thing because we built tremendous camaraderie and trust and a ferocious fighting unit. And some of the greatest fighting units in the history of the world are this way. The downside of that is when you mess up, if you're ostracized from that unit or any unit. I mean, anything in life, if you're told, hey, we no longer want you, whether that's a family, whether that's a relationship, or in this case, whether it's part of a organization or a tribe you're a part of, in my opinion, those mental and emotional wounds, we also see it when guys, and I'm going to say guys, I mean, this could apply to some women, but it's more guys in the protector community that suddenly find themselves out of the protector community. Maybe not because of their own doing, but because of an injury or something happened. So when guys suddenly get forced out of the community because they suffered an injury. So they've been medically retired from police, law enforcement, fire abruptly. That's really hard. And it's the mental and emotional wounds that are much deeper and harder to deal with than the physical ones. It's the same thing on the battlefield. I try to explain this to people. It used to drive me insane. I ran my own nonprofit. I would bring wounded warriors to events, or I'd get invited to events, and they always loved having me because I got scars all over my face, and I'd bring other guys who either A, you couldn't see their injuries, or B, they had some invisible wounds. And it was so insulting when individuals would go, hey, is there any way, these guys, they look okay. Is there any way you could bring more people that are missing limbs and have more scars like you? I mean, I know this is a Christian podcast, so it makes me angry. And I want to say, F you.
You can say whatever you want, man. Say whatever you want.
Yeah, I just want to say, fuck you, man. I mean, that is just so insulting. And for those who have never, ever been through massively traumatic things in their life, they don't understand that. And that's why I tell them that physical injuries are hard, but where you have power over physical injuries is you have a choice. You have a choice in how you're going to deal with it. Granted, the doctors have to fix things, but you play a big part into that. Your attitude, how you drive forward, how you attack rehab, how you understand, okay, maybe this is where I'm at. Do I have the ability to get here? You have some control and you have a choice. Now, you can lay there and feel sorry for yourself, which plenty of people do. They choose that victim mindset. When you fail and you have the mental and emotional deep wounds, that's much harder. You're having to now navigate the most dangerous battlefield you'll ever walk on, which is this one. And that's far more dangerous than the real world battlefields we walk and the physical injuries that you'll go through.
Well, I mean, you have so many things that you need to overcome. It goes back to something that you were talking about earlier, like the doing hard things part. I mean, we live in a society where we don't have to hunt for our food. We can drive to the store in our, climate controlled vehicle and walk into a climate controlled environment and buy, meat wrapped in cellophane that somebody else killed the animal and took care of the meat and got it to us. We live in such an easy place. And so to a certain degree, we have to bring in difficulty into our life. But then for you, you didn't choose the difficulty of the ambush. Like you didn't choose to get shot up. You chose the job and you knew that was potentially part of the job. But there was a fairly appropriate quote from Overcome that I think kind of will back into the question that I have. I want to read the quote here. I could feel the life slipping out of me. To be honest, it was a luxury knowing I was dying. For some people, death comes in a millisecond. They don't even realize it's coming. For me, I was lying in that firefight for 35 minutes, which left ample time to reflect. So it seems like there's different categories, Jason. There's people that just die suddenly, right? Maybe they're shot in the head or, they get like incinerated in some sort of an accident, so they die suddenly. Then you have the people that die slowly. Maybe they have cancer for months and months, maybe years and years, and so they're staring mortality in the face every single day. You're kind of somewhere in the middle where you're like, I am in the process of dying. It is imminent. It is somewhere between seconds and hours away. This is it. I want to talk a little bit more about your mindset in that moment, because you mentioned it a little bit earlier where you had this clarity that didn't have anything to do with social media clout. It didn't have to do with the number of push-ups or pull-ups you could do. It had to do with the most important core level things. So as rough as it might be, even though you've built, a very successful career of helping people because of this situation, let's go back to where you're sitting in the sand thinking that this is going to be it, and take me through the mindset and the type of clarity that you did actually have in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, the clarity, so training kicked in first. I mean, I was shot up and I was knocked unconscious, although I didn't realize it. Funny, when I got to the hospital, they kept asking me, did I ever lose consciousness? And I was adamant that I never did. And it's not like you realize. There were just gaps in time, which my teammates filled in once they got back and I met with them. So in my mind, I just had a steady stream of consciousness. So I remember being shot. I remember recognizing, at some point, oh my God, I've been shot in the face. I recognized that I was totally pinned down. I mean, literally, I was laying on my back and there was machine gun fire about 8 inches above me. So I realized I was totally out of this fight. I mean, we call it combat ineffective. I mean, there was nothing I could really do. I had to rely on my teammates. Although training was still, I was thinking through, well, what should we be doing? And I was thinking through, well, hey, we need to be contacting the quick reaction force. And what air assets do we have overhead? And what drones do we have so we can see where the enemy is on the battlefield? And I knew I needed a medevac. So I was like, all right, I hope that they're contacting we had a TF-160th Special Operations medevac helicopter on standby. So these were all the things that were initially going through my head. When once I kind of realized that my team leader was running the fight and that I was bleeding out, my thoughts kind of transitioned from operational to, hey, dude, you're dying. And that was kind of a little bit of a realization. And my first thought on that was anger. I was angry. I was angry that, that my decision-making had put me in this position, that I had led my team into this position, that, because I knew, other guys had been shot at this point. I'm all shot up at this point, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But I knew if I died, that was a tremendous victory for the enemy. Killing special operations members was a top prize for them. And they were very good at leveraging information warfare, and they would have broadcast that, hey, we killed a SEAL and all this stuff, if they had found that out. I mean, that's what was going through my mind. From there, it started to transition to, I feel like my life kind of flashed before my eyes some, and not necessarily scene by scene, but it was more of, I started thinking about the things that I started thinking about things I had done, regrets. I thought about things like, I wish I had not done those things. And then I started thinking about things I hadn't done. I wish I had spent more time with my family. I wish I had spent more time on the important things and not so much of the dumb shit. And that kind of led me full circle back to my family. And I was just like, man, I wish I had, if I could do anything, I wish I could just tell them I loved them one more time before I check out. I also thought about that I wouldn't get to celebrate these big milestones that, you think about with your wife and kids, as you're raising kids, the holidays and the graduations, and someday, I thought about I would never walk my daughter down the aisle, and that, that's a hard thing. I am so thankful that, last year in 2022, December of 2022, my oldest daughter got married and I walked her down the aisle. So I am so thankful that God gave me that gift that I didn't think I would ever have. Because in those moments, I literally was dying. I mean, there was no doubt about it. We get an extensive amount of medical training. I knew I was going through all the signs of what we call hypovolemic shock. I mean, it's from blood loss. I had lost a lot of blood. I had not been able to get my tourniquet on, and I was pinned down still out front, in front of my team. So. At this point, my faith, I'd grown up in a very religious home growing up. When I got into the military, I kind of lost my faith for a while. And although I will tell you that it was coming back more and more in combat has an amazing way of making you facing the fact that, you may not be coming home. I think on every mission I went, as I left, I accepted the fact I may not, hey, this is a dangerous job. I may not come home. This may be the last mission I do. So a lot more prayers, as, this was the end of my second combat deployment, my first in Afghanistan, the second one here in Iraq. And as I lay there and I thought about never seeing my family again, I called out to God. I said, God, I need your help. I need strength. I want to see my wife and kids again. And I went from, I could not move a muscle. I remember I tried to move my right hand, which was not injured, and I couldn't even feel it. And instantly I had energy. I had, and I don't know how long this was. I don't know how long that I said that prayer. And by the time the medevac helicopter came in, but I do know that when at some point my team leader ran forward to grab me, got me back behind a tire we were using for cover. And then we called in some fire missions, and then we called in the medevac. And he tried to drag me into the helicopter, and it was really painful. And I just told him, I said, hey, just help me to my feet. And he helped me up. And I went from not being able to move a muscle and struggling just to breathe, to getting up and I walked 75 yards and got on that medevac helicopter under my own power. So I can't explain that. The doctors say it's a miracle I survived. I needed 8 blood transfusions from the time I got to Baghdad until the time I got to Bethesda. And the doctors say it's a miracle I survived. It's funny. I've talked to a lot of different people. I've talked to doctors who just say, it was your fitness that enabled your survival. I've talked to atheists who say, well, it wasn't this or that. I don't know. I've never felt anything like it before. It was like this power. And I wish I could feel it again, because sometimes I struggle. I'm very transparent. Sometimes I struggle with my faith, and I try and go back to that night, and I ask God, why can't you? I want to feel that again. Show me. And I have other friends who say, hey, man, be thankful for be thankful for that moment and lean on that moment. So anyways, amazing. And I can't explain it, but I feel like I am still here and got a second chance. And I'm so thankful for that. Most of us do not get it. Most of us, you get one shot at this life. And when your day comes, like we talked about, split second, and you see, wow, this is the end. And then it is the end. Or, maybe you do have more time, but we never know when it's coming. I mean, we never know.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you getting into all that detail. I remember early on, because, I live in Oklahoma, belt buckle of the Bible Belt, and so we have a lot of church camps around here, and so kids go to church camp, right? And so you got the church camp high, it's worship every night, and everybody's crying and praying and all that. And then, a couple weeks go by, and you're back into your normal routine of school and practice and siblings and, all that kind of stuff, and you're wondering where the feeling went. And I remember a guy that was mentoring me in college said, Kyle, do you want your entire faith in God to rest on how you feel at the moment? And then you start reading through scripture and you see the laments of David and the Psalms, and you see just the anguish that the apostles went through, like in the book of Acts and things like that. And you're just like, man, we're not guaranteed fun feelings. But there's one word that stuck out to me when I was reading Overcome, and it was the word ignite, or it was actually reignite. And that's what I think was very interesting. I'll actually read the whole quote here because I think it's special. For me, spiritual leadership means a strong faith in God, meeting with other people who share my beliefs, and living for more than myself. My faith journey has been reignited in Iraq, or had been reignited in Iraq. That night when I called out to God in the middle of a firefight, and I had that sudden influx of energy, enabling me to get up and walk off the battlefield, I felt like God had given me a second chance at life, and I wanted to make the most of it. Your spiritual leadership might look different, but it's worth investing in and understanding that there is a much bigger world than you can impact than just the small sphere you live in. Again, great section there, but it's reignited, right? So like your faith had been reignited. And that's what I think is so important, is because you'd probably rather not have to have it reignited in a way like that, but you certainly don't want that all the time. It's part of the reconciliation process when you accept Christ, that it's like, okay, you're not a finished product right in the moment. It's like the moment you got your Trident, like, yeah, in terms of the federal government, you were officially a Navy SEAL, but even you would say you had a lot of other workups, you had deployments, like you were being reconciled as a SEAL, as it were. Whereas like as a Christian, it's like you're just a baby when you become a Christian, regardless of what age you are. And it's that process of God pulling you through those moments, allowing you to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, because he's there with you the whole time, whether you realize it or not. You know what I mean?
100%.
And the thing that I think is important about this entire discussion, Jason, is just the overall idea about resilience. And we see that, whenever you're going through your recovery process, because, you get back to the United States, you're starting your recovery process. And in the introduction for this episode today, I read the sign, right? The sign that posted, that you posted on your door, that you had your wife write. And, the fact that it went viral and it really changed your life in a lot of ways. And so we don't have to read the entire sign right now. But the whole time, I remember the story when it happened. And I remember rereading it, here recently, and it's like the only word that could come to mind was resilience. It's like, I don't need your pity. Like, if you can't help me fuel my recovery and my resilience, then I don't need your presence. So let's just go back to the recovery room. You're back stateside. You're starting the recovery process. Again, you're all shot up. You've got a lot of surgeries in your past and a whole lot more in your future. But then, as opposed to sitting there and lamenting and your situation and your circumstances and maybe your life choices, you seem to be overwhelmed with this thought of, will you please stop talking about me as if I'm not here? Will you please stop talking about me as if I'm this porcelain animal that could crack into a million pieces, at any moment?
Yeah. And I mean, I think, I had been down that path before. I mean, the victim mindset. So it's interesting when people go through hard times, there is some power in saying, like our grandpas used to, hey, buck up, rub a little kerosene on it and let's go. And we're overly sensitive now. And one of the great things about being a severely wounded warrior is now I can call out other wounded warriors. The victim mindset is a real thing. Yeah. And there are people that buy into it. As a matter of fact, we are cultivating a culture of victimhood in this country right now. We want to convince everybody they're a victim. Race, creed, color, gender persuasion, demographic, I don't care what you are, you're a victim and you don't have the power to pull yourself up and to be successful without government or somebody else helping you, which is such BS. The reality is there are millions and millions of people who have suffered all kinds of losses who came from whatever catastrophic thing, whether it's they were born on the wrong side of the tracks or the wrong color or the wrong gender. I don't care what they think they were. At the end of the day, it's merely a choice to drive forward and be a victor, not a victim. And that's what happened. People wanted to put me in the victim box. Oh my God, you're severely wounded. Your face is blown out. You have no use of your arm. They may amputate your arm. Oh, woe is you, and we just want to pat you on the head and, hey, you just sit there in your sorrow and pity. I walked that road before. When I failed as a leader, man, I went through a period where I was the victim. Like, hey, my teammates put me here, everybody put me here, and the world is unfair. And that was my mindset for a while, for several months. Until I finally realized, like, hey, man, like, most of that was your fault. 90% of it was your fault. And guess what? The other part of that is you are the solution to getting out of this problem. And this is where you drive forward. And I realized the same thing. I was like, I'm sure not going to lay in this bed and feel sorry for myself. I'm not going to go down the road I went before where I saw myself as a victim when I failed as a leader. I sure as hell wasn't a victim for being all shot up. I mean, it's amazing to me how many people, somebody the other day, I just did this big interview with English group, the Mulligan Brothers. So big shout out to them. We have people in our own country, but I also see it abroad where people are writing like, hey, we're really sorry your government did this to you. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I willingly serve. I'm so proud of my service to my country. This weirdness we're having where patriotism is being eroded and this idea that your love of country is a bad thing is disturbing and just crazy to me. I'm proud of my service. I learned so many lessons from my service, the highs and lows of my career. I went into it knowing that A, I could be injured, and B, I could be killed. But I was willing to do it because I believed. I saw very evil people, and we were taking very evil people out. I stand behind what I did. So I just think that's crazy. All of that, once again, lends itself to this victim mindset. And I had been there before, and I said, I will never go down that road again. So when everybody was talking about, hey, we feel sorry for you, I was like, that is not going to happen. No one is coming into this room. And it was an awesome red line for me to draw because I was like, oh, hell no. Like, if people are going to start coming into my room feeling sorry for me, that's a dangerous thing, because at what point does that start planting seeds in your mind where you start feeling sorry for yourself? Like, oh no, you're going to live in my world. I'm not going to live in yours. So I knew that I was going to make a statement like, hey, here's the rules. You can either live by them or go away. And, control, you have control over the people that are around you. So that's how the sign on the door came to be. In that moment, I wrote out that sign. It said, attention to all who enter here. If you're coming to this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people that I love, defending the freedom of a country that I deeply love. I will make a full recovery. What is full? That's the absolute utmost physically. I have the ability to recover. And I'm going to push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense rapid regrowth. If you are not prepared for that, go elsewhere. And that became the sign on the door. And the interesting, I'll finish with this, Kyle, and turn it back over to you. I often tell people how powerful it is to write a mission statement like that when you're going through hard times. And I even encourage guys to do it in any part of their life. I have a planner called the Point Man Planner. And in it, I talk about writing a mission statement because in the hard times, it's easy to lose ourselves and to forget who we are and forget who we want to be. That sign became my anchor for years. And even today, I mean, people know me for that sign. But when I was going through my recovery and the hardest times, when I was having setbacks, when I was having infection problems, when I was really struggling, I would look at that sign and say, that's who you are, bro. Like, get up, let's go, be positive. You're setting the example for your kids and other wounded warriors. Like, stop feeling sorry for yourself. So it didn't mean that I had this perfect path. I mean, I had plenty of hard days. But it did always remind me, and it gave me a touch point to go back to remind me myself of, hey, this is who I am.
Right, and that's your anchor point, and that's where you have to set. And part of it, I talk a lot on the show about pre-decision. So there are a lot of people that wait until they get into the dramatic moment to decide what they're going to do. Kind of the extreme examples like, okay, a kinetic active shooter situation. It's like if you're deciding in the moment whether or not you're willing to take a life to protect yourself and the other people around you, it's probably a little bit too late for you to make that decision. There's some pre-decision that has to happen. I've struggled with alcohol before. Maybe is your story where it's like, well, I'm going to pre-decide that I'm not going to accept an invitation to hang out at a bar with buddies, right? If that's been a temptation or a source of struggle for you. But I do want to go back to something that you said because of the absolute disastrous pullout from Afghanistan a couple of years back, because of, I guess, the hue through which we view the war on terror, the global war on terror, with the things that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, there has been a lot of talk around the number of military members that we lost, but also are wounded and the ones that aren't just physically wounded, but mentally wounded, PTSD or any of those other struggles. And a lot of people are asking the question, they're like, well, was it worth it? Was all that blood and treasure over 2 decades, was it quote unquote worth it? Now, everybody gets to decide their own value judgments in terms of what is worth it in this, type of sacrificial system and what is not worth it. But I'm curious for your perspective, because I talked to a lot of people that served, in the weeks after the Afghanistan pullout, and they were all pretty much unanimous in that they were flabbergasted, they were sickened by how everything went down. But then none of them were like, oh, and by the way, I also regret my service because it was a complete waste of time. But to the generalized civvy public, you do get that sentiment, which is like, look at all the people and money that we just wasted over there to have the exact same people in power as before we got there. So I would just love your overall thoughts on that, because believe me, there are a lot of people having these conversations and thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll say 1 million, unequivocally, there aren't even numbers that can say, was it worth it? It was worth it for such a myriad of reasons. And one of the biggest ones, there's this mindset out there, America first, we shouldn't go abroad. We should pull everything back in. And I don't agree with that. I am a fan of foreign diplomacy, and I do think we need to be around the world spreading a message of democracy and freedom. And there are people that say, well, there are some people that just can't understand that. Well, you're right. And they're never going to understand it if we close our doors and never get out there. At the end of the day, I don't care who you are. If I was in Peru and I met a tribe that was deep, deep, deep in the Amazon basin who literally lived the same way they've lived for thousands of years. So, and if I sat down and talked to them and I said, hey, what are your thoughts on human rights and freedom? they would say, well, I think that the average person should be able to live their life how they see fit, and that they should be able to make decisions on their own. Because I don't care who you are as humans, that is a natural thought process. And I think that that's part of who we are and part of our duties and responsibilities as humans. I think throughout history, I mean, you think if you look at Christianity, Jesus said, go out into the world and spread this message. I think democracy is also similar to that. Like, hey, people should be free to follow their hopes and dreams, and we should push that. And that is something that has been built on the foundation of America. And we have been doing it. We did it in all these different things. And all these people who want to try to say, oh, America's just an evil place and colonialism, and we only went to Iraq for oil and all this other BS it's mind-numbing to me, the people that write things like that on my social media. You were just a puppet of the government. I want to make something incredibly clear. The people who knocked down the World Trade Center and flew a plane into the Pentagon and into that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, were incredibly evil. And the people who follow them and believe in them in this distorted view of radical Muslim ideology would gladly rape, kill, behead, defile you, your sons, daughters, every aspect of our life because of a twisted ideology. And I met many of those people. I saw the hate they had for us. And I am glad, I don't bat an eye at having the opportunity to go out and try and help those people on their way to the other side. Because there were some of them who merely didn't really believe. That was one of the things I began to find. There were a lot of them who didn't believe in the cause they were fighting. They were just pulled into it, and war kind of makes that happen. They were opportunists, if you will. But when they learned about America, and when we were over there and we were setting up schools and we were creating electrical grids in places that had never had electricity, and we were showing them running water, and we were showing them plumbing, and we were showing them, hey, let's set up schools. We created all these schools across Afghanistan that had not happened with the Taliban. Women's rights and all these different things. And they were like, finally they were like, gosh, America doesn't seem to be here to, invade us. They actually seem to be here, to eliminate a idealistic threat, the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and ISIS.
Yep.
If you want to look at it in that manner. And so, yes, I mean, if we come full circle, for any of you that served, that is what we went after. And it really was good versus evil. And at the end of the day, throughout history, I mean, sometimes that line gets blurred, but at the end of the day, there are evil people who do evil things, and then there are good people who are willing to stand up against those evil people. I am fortunate to say I was able to go after some of those evil people. So yes, it saddens me that we lost friends in Afghanistan and that this country did such a poor job. Our leadership did such a poor job, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we continue to make those same mistakes. We did the same thing in Vietnam. So I hope that we can do a better job of electing better leaders. I sure don't feel like it's the leaders we're putting forth right now, but at some point I hope we can get better about future political leaders who truly understand what's best for the future of our country and what's best for the world and America's impact in it.
Well,
and I'll get off my soapbox.
No, dude, I'm going to get you right back on your soapbox here in just a second, so you just get ready. But evil doesn't stop itself. Only foolish people believe that evil would stop itself. Evil has to be stopped. Like the mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness. How do you think exactly darkness is pushed back? Sometimes you push back on bad philosophies, and you do that through argumentation. Sometimes you push back on the darkness that people would have in humanity, or not in humanity, but in eternity, by sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with them so that they can accept it, repent of their sins, and put their faith in Christ. But when there are people, there are wolves that are trying to take advantage of the sheep and kill the sheep. I use the example all the time. There was a woman on a train car in Philadelphia that was being raped. And whenever the police showed up, there were a bunch of people that went to the police with their phones because as opposed to interceding, they had filmed the rape. So nobody tried to stop it. And guess what? In that moment, There's no time for a Bible study. There's no time for, excuse me, sir, I don't know if you actually know this, but in the Bible, in this one particular section, it says that we're not actually supposed to do that. So if you wouldn't mind, when it's convenient for you, stop violently penetrating this innocent person. There's no time for that. The only thing that you're needing to do in that moment is to protect that image bearer of Christ and stop that thing from happening to them. And so, again, I would echo your sentiments to everyone that served over there. You were pushing back darkness. And that doesn't mean that everything you did over there was copacetic or, went by all the rules, or that you're not going to have to answer for it someday. But that is the mission ultimately that you were on. But Jason, we're in this kind of weird space where, the United States, we are the dominant hegemonic structure in terms of the world. People are like, oh, you're just the world police. You're getting into all these other situations, military industrial complex, or whatever the latest, conspiracy theorist person is saying on their podcast. But we do get involved in a lot of different places directly with boots on the ground. And then there's other places where we don't. So right now there's a whole lot of money flowing to Ukraine to fight a war that not everybody here stateside really believes in, and certainly doesn't believe in the non-corruptibility of the Ukrainian government and their officials. The same thing happening with Israel. We have Joe Biden playing pretty fast and loose. Some days he seems to be pro-Israel, and other days he seems to, be like, well, if you don't do exactly what I want, we're not going to send these missiles to you or these other armaments and things like that. So how do you feel about how the country currently operates? Because, Republicans and Democrats both understand that boots on the ground, we don't really have the appetite for it as American civilians right now. Putting boots on the ground, in Taiwan to protect them from the Chinese, or in the Middle East, really anywhere right now. How do you feel about our current standing and how we all basically see our place in the world and keeping the peace, as it were?
Well, I think part of the problem is our political system has reached a point where everything is done for the immediate right here and right now. So we have to appease our constituency right now. So you say they don't have an appetite for boots on the ground. You're right. We just finished 20 years of war with Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'll be honest, it was the pressure of the people who drove us out of Afghanistan, along with poor decision-making political leaders on both sides, in my opinion. It started with Trump with the decisions to pull out of Afghanistan, and then that continued with Biden and, making deals with the Taliban, and just bad decision-making, in my opinion. We never should have allowed, hang on, let me back up for a second. So we're making decisions on the right here and now. That's checkers. We need to be getting the American people to think about, we need to be making decisions for the next 20, 30, 50 years. You need to stop thinking about you and what's best for you, and you need to be thinking about what's best for your kids and your grandkids. And there's this idealistic idea that everything will be great and that it'll continue this way. Russia is not playing that game. China definitely is not playing that game. They are playing a very long game. And they're doing everything in their power to destabilize us and make us look bad. And we're playing into it 100%. And when we say, well, we're not going to get involved, whether it's boots on the ground or whether it's, how we're going to support it, it's not really Ukraine. And even if you try and say, well, some of their government is, not, what's the word I'm looking for? Some of their government is corrupt. Yeah, well, so is ours. So give me a break on this. There is probably no government in the world that doesn't have some levels of corruption. But at the end of the day, the enemy of a friend, Russia is a problem for us. China is a problem for us. Those are real things. And they would love to destabilize and knock America off its pedestal. They'd love to knock the American dollar off, which would be detrimental to us in the future of our country and our kids and grandkids. So we need people and leaders to start playing the long game and to start talking to their people about saying, hey, look, American people, you may not like this in the short run. It may be hard, but guess what? We need to start making decisions that are better for the future of America 20, 30, 50, 100 years down the road if we're ever going to continue to be a great superpower. Because if not, if you're going to continue to make decisions in the right here and now, and we're going to say, it makes us uncomfortable, because, man, God forbid, I don't want to send anybody to war. I've been to war. War's horrible. But I tell you what would be more horrible is we reach a point that we collapse and Russia or China has the ability to come in through whatever means And now, and we allowed it to happen because we sat back and we were so focused on what can you do for me right now instead of what should we be doing, what's better for the future of our country.
Well, and Jason, you're nailing it because in America, we think in 2-year cycles. Why? Because that's when we have elections, right? That's when we have our major elections. So we're thinking what can get us a little bit more of our people and our color ties in either the House, the Senate, and then the White House. And we think in 2-year chunks. Whereas China, as you alluded to, they're thinking in 100-year chunks, right? You know, Xi is obviously, he's going to instill himself as the leader of China for his entire life. That's the entire point of why he's kind of running this totalitarian game right now. But they're trying to think in 100 years, how can we be dominant? It's one of the main reasons why no politician, left or right here in the United States, will talk about entitlements. They won't talk about entitlement spending. Why? Because it would get them out of office in the next election, whether they're the president or a senator or a U.S. House of Representatives member. And so that we're going to be going over a cliff as a country, and these programs will become insolvent because we won't just like raise our hand and be like, hey guys, this isn't sustainable. That was one of my hopes, that if Trump got a second term, not with a break in between with co-president Biden, but if he got a second term, that he would have been loose cannon enough to be like, yeah, this stuff is disastrous and we have to restructure it and everyone's just going to have to deal with it because otherwise we're not going to have a country by the time this is all said and done. But now I'm on my soapbox and I got to get off because, we're winding a little bit to a close here. And the cool thing about what you have, Jason, is some people just have a story. You don't just have a story, you have a story and you have a mission. So you've got a lot of different things that you've done and a lot of different things that you're doing. So as opposed to me picking the ones that sounded the coolest to me, I just want to set you up. I want to know, what are you working on right now? How are you helping people right now? And what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to help people to become the best version of themselves. And I think that, for all you men out there, I think there's 3 components that you need to be. You need to be a provider, you need to be a protector, and you need to be a leader. Those are the 3 components that we need more in individuals. So as a protector, you need to train. I am a staunch advocate of the Second Amendment. And this idea that I think I saw it, it's a perfect example. Iraq and Afghanistan were a perfect example. We were the greatest superpower in the world with some of the greatest military technology in the world. And we had individuals with AK-47s who were able to effectively fight back against us by, asymmetrical warfare that they waged against us. What does that tell you? Well, that tells you, we're not going to do it with muskets, but with a basic semi-automatic military-style weapon, you have the ability to make a stance against a tyrannical government. Now, I pray that's never our government, but I tell you what, throughout history, governments have lost their way when they start losing power and the support of the people. And that's what our founding fathers understood, and that does not go away. So, hey, you should train. We're only 96 hours, at any given moment, we're only 96 hours away from a collapse of society. That's a fact.
Yep.
And if you don't understand that, Kyle, you said it in the beginning, hey, we can go to the store, and don't get me wrong, I love nice things. I mean, speaking in this life that I provided, man, I love a 5-star hotel and a beautiful bed. But guess what? In a moment's notice, if I have to, I have go bags and I have trained my family, and I will be ready if the worst happens. And I pray it doesn't, but you know what? You should have a mindset of that. You should have a mindset of just, what if you talked about all the tornadoes. What if a massive tornado came along and did damage that totally disrupted your community where for months you didn't have access to any of those things? How are you going to take care of your family and your community? So those are things that I'm teaching on the tactical side, survival and tactical training. I'm teaching individuals to be better leaders, to build that overcome mindset. I've started teaching people to be better speakers. God gave me a gift to deliver a message, and I'm very good at looking at how people deliver speaking. Speaking, believe it or not, is that we've said it throughout history. The pen is mightier than the sword. Your ability to get in front of an audience and articulate a message and motivate and inspire and provide guidance and communication to people is one of the most powerful things you can do. So you should know how to do that. You should know how to communicate to your family, your community, your company. So I teach those things. I want to help people to be better communicators, whether that's from a stage, whether that's in your company. Those are things that I'm doing. So, and then the last thing, Kyle, I want to help men be better husbands. I am very fortunate that, I have been with my wife for 25 years. We've been married 23 years. We have overcome massive things that most people cannot. She is my most important teammate, and we ran our marriage kind of like a mission, like a no-fail mission. Like tier one operators go on no-fail missions. And we ran everything about our marriage that way. This is a no-fail mission. Well, in order to train for no-fail missions, you have to train. Well, guess what? You have to train in your family, in your relationship. And then number 3, you have to communicate at all times. It's not, hey, I'm the dude, I'm the leader, you're going to do what I say. It is a team. And sometimes she is behind you, sometimes she's beside you, and sometimes my wife has been in front of me fighting like hell for me. And we are an amazing team. So our book, Invincible Marriage, comes out next year. And I'm super excited about that because divorce is on the rise. Almost 50% of marriages today end in divorce. And guys need the tools to understand, hey, man, you are the leader of your family, but at the same time, that your wife can be the most important teammate you have if you understand how to build that relationship.
Well, make sure your wonderful daughter takes a note that I would love to have you back on next year to talk about that book. I think that would absolutely be fantastic. We share this because here's the thing. If you believe in spiritual warfare, it's because you're a smart person. And the thing about Satan is, what of all the things on this planet would he revel in destroying more than marriages? And the answer is nothing. And the reason is because we were given marriage as one of the only ways we could possibly fathom Jesus' love for us, because Jesus' bride was the church and he laid his life down for her, right? And so for us, specifically as husbands, that's the closest we can get. Our relationship with our wife is the closest that we can get to even understanding a modicum of what that actually means in terms of humanity, eternity, the Trinity, all of those different things. So I would love to talk to you more about that. But that's all the questions that I've got for you. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, man, if you guys want to find me, if you're looking for speaking, I speak everything from companies to churches to teams and organizations. You can find me at jasonredman.com, and you can find all my information for the different programs I'm running there, and along with my social handles.
I'll make sure all that's in the show notes. Jason Redman, thank you for coming on Undaunted.Life, a Man's podcast.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
All right, guys, thanks for listening to my interview with Jason Redman. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So the links I've got for you today, I've got a link to Jason's website. So if you're interested in any of the stuff that he's doing, especially the stuff he talked about there at the end of the interview, you can go to jasonredman.com. And I've got Amazon links to where you can buy your own copy of the Trident and Overcome. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.